10.
Broadcasting across the state of Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network and around the world on the Civic Media app. This is the Dom Salvia Show. And now, here's your host, Dom Salvia.
And welcome to the Dom Salvia Show. Thank you for listening, hanging out with us. We certainly do appreciate it. Got Jess PS on the board. Thank you, Jess. Happy days to us all. You can be a part 855-752-4842. A little change up in this regular schedule for Dom and Friends this week. Tomorrow,
we have a regular schedule.
kind of, Tomorrow, Earl Ingram will join me, but today, normally reserved for tomorrow, super jazzed as hell to reintroduce James Santelle, former U.S. attorney and host of Amicus, a law review right here on the Civic Media Radio Network. Jim, welcome to Thursday.
Even Thursdays are a great day to be on the Dom Salvia Show. There's no such thing as a bad day, right?
Man,
right?
You're too kind. Right? Lots of news to get to today, and Donald Trump has some filings as friend of the courts because, of course, he's no longer indicted. We have the fires out in California and former President Jimmy Carter being laid to rest. Saw some pictures of the former presidents sitting in the row today. Let's perhaps start there if you can, Jim. I saw you had sent over some pictures of the olden days.
Yes.
What was your affiliation with the Carter administration,
So
Jim?
this is how old I am. You forced me to disclose this, but believe it or not, in the summer of 1980, which turned out to be the last time that Jimmy Carter and his staff were in the White House, I was a staff intern in the West Wing and had an opportunity to work on the staff of somebody who spoke today at the National Cathedral. His name was Stuart Eisenstadt. He was a domestic policy chief for Jimmy Carter. And I'm not saying I contributed anything to the well-being of America in 1980, but had this great opportunity to be there at that time, a time of uncertainty about the future. The Iran hostage crisis was still underway. We still had inflation, lots of oil issues, lots of energy issues, but had this wonderful opportunity to have a front row seat. Again, not contributing a whole lot, I suspect, to the domestic policy staff, but just bringing in a huge amount of information and insight. Had the opportunity on several occasions not only to meet with, but to also to be in the room with and hear Jimmy Carter personally talk with us. And again, inspiring in that moment as he is even today.
Contributing to the well-being of America. Hell, Jim, this was the Carter administration. Exactly, If any Republicans heard you say that, I think they would say that you were part of the problem.
Right, exactly. And, one of the things that I've been saying, again, for the past several years, ever since Jimmy Carter became ill and recovered, and again, obviously, buried his wonderful wife, Rosalind, there in Plains a couple of years or so ago, is there's this notion out there that Jimmy Carter's presidency is a failed presidency. You can hear that again, even today. And yet, when you look back at the kinds of things that he did in so many different areas, I mean, not just creating agencies like, say, the Department of Education that brought together, again, all the mechanisms for ensuring some high level of education in America.
You mean that department that the Republicans now want to dismantle?
That's exactly. That would be the one. That would be the one.
Okay.
That would be the one. Department of Energy as well. And again, one of my great recollections of that summer was his focus on the Energy Act of 1980. He gave out awards for people who were preserving energy and ensuring, frankly, something called the future of our climate. Now, he didn't speak about it in the same way that we talk about it today, but those kinds of messages, they were on his mind very notoriously, famously, as many people have recounted, placed solar panels on the roof of the White House.
That's right.
At that time, a little
exactly.
A little gimmicky, probably was not the efficiency we have today. Ronald Reagan
but
takes them down.
I mean, it's not
exactly.
It's not just hell. They're not as efficient as the ones are today, and probably more expensive, and all those. Right. Well, it's certainly symbolic. I mean, the president of the United States, he's making a point, during an energy crisis.
Absolutely, and sending those messages about who we should be. We all recall a speech well, some of us recall a speech called the Malaise speech, but again, not one that he never used that word in July of 1979, addressed the entire nation and said, we live in a time when unfortunately people don't talk about what they can do. A little bit of shades of JFK, right, in the inaugural address there. Talk instead about the things that they can acquire, the things that we can put in our backyard.
Now, my understanding in that speech, Jim, he kind of pocketed his actual speech and kind of spoke off the cuff in that regard.
It very clear that he was doing just that, and I think there were an awful lot of people who were looking at their scripts and saying, gee, what's going on? People, again, at that time poo-poo that. That was also the speech, and he said, what, we need to think about going less driving a little bit less, perhaps, wearing sweaters. He was mocked for saying that, right? Yeah. All those kinds of things. But the kinds of things he talked about in terms of who we should be as Americans and the notion that we are all in this together, meaning all in this together, and talking about the commitment that we all need to make to a better America. You listen to those words today and you think, gosh, here is a guy, again, 40, 45, 46 years ago, who was talking about America, and maybe it didn't exist at the time. Hard to listen to that and think that's what we should be focusing on today.
Folks, you're listening to the Dom Salvia Show. James Santelle joining me today. You can do so as well, 855-752-4842. My understanding after that speech, Jim, his ratings went up a little bit.
They did.
That
right.
was resonated with the folks.
At 10 points or something like that.
Yeah,
didn't
10,
stay there,
points.
but right.
But then ultimately, obviously, I think some folks decided that, well, it was perhaps the wrong thing, telling people what to do, what our failings were as a country. And, and maybe that wasn't the time or the place to engage in that kind of leadership, that, and ultimately he lost that election.
He did, and admitting basically that America is not a perfect place. Gosh, can you imagine that notion, right? And advancing this notion, we've talked about in this very show, my friend, which is that it is not unpatriotic to comment about the ways in which we can do better. He was commenting on just that at the time, right? And so I think it also hit it right in the head. It also laid the groundwork for Ronald Reagan to come along and say, you know what? America, a shining city on the hill, which again, I think in many ways it is still on the face of the planet, but unassailable in terms of who we are. And again, promise all these kinds of things that have reverberations even today that are not realistic and set us down a road, not only economically. Recall that Ronald Reagan, that was a time period when the tax rates for the most rich in our nation began to drop dramatically. That's when it started to happen. All those things, you can literally trace them back to post Jimmy Carter
and huge budget deficits,
huge budget
national
deficits,
debt
right?
increases
Right.
under
Absolutely.
Reagan.
Right. And again, this notion somehow that the Republicans are the ones of fiscal responsibility, when in fact it's always the Democrats. It's just a matter of economic reality, including Jimmy Carter, and again, including Bill Clinton, including Barack Obama, including Joe Biden, again, who get things back in shape economically. Ronald Reagan went in the other direction plainly, as did other presidents to greater and lesser degrees. But Jimmy Carter at that time, again, was speaking to the people in a way that I think reverberates today. Speaking truth in a way, again, Ronald Reagan seized upon that and said, you don't need to listen to this fellow who's telling you all about how we need to do better. And instead, just listen to me. Kind of a little bit of shades of Donald Trump saying,
a little bit,
we'll do this all for you, and everything is just fine. Well, we are always a nation improving. We still are to this day. Jimmy Carter was. We forget too. He was all about civil rights. He ran for governor, obviously in Georgia. And during his inaugural speech there, talked about how segregation in the South needs to be a part of the past. People were surprised by that because he really didn't run on that. But again, that was a part of his articulated posture about America, spoke to that. Even something in terms of economics. He appointed Paul Volcker, remember that name? Federal Reserve Chair. Tamed inflation, ultimately got some new policies there in the Federal Reserve. All those kinds of things that we forget about beyond the big things, too, right? We've got the Camp David Accords, Israel and Egypt at that time, pursuing, again, what Richard Nixon began, opening the doors to China, right? Ratification of this thing where apparently, Dom, at some point in our past, we owned actually the Panama Canal. And in 1999, by virtue of what Jimmy Carter negotiated, we gave it up to the Panamanians. And now that issue is back as the Panamanian president needs to lecture us on how No, it is now owned by the Panamanians. Everyone has access to it.
No, come on, man. There's
Right?
according to Donald Trump and the MAGAs and the Republicans, of course, this wasn't why Donald Trump won the election. It wasn't something he ran on. But according to those folks, come on, there's Chinese troops like basically patrolling the ports down there. Of course, that's a total absolute lie, a provable lie.
Right.
But those are the things that they are saying.
Right. And we've got the president of Panama announcing again, repeatedly, using the expression, for the love of God, there are no Chinese soldiers here monitoring and operating the canal zone. Jimmy Carter sold it to the Panamanians for $1. That's a legal concept. That's consideration. And basically established something that's right in America's, right for our neighbors, our allies in Panama, and ensured basically that economically the world has access through the Panama Canal by virtue of the Panamanians being in charge of it. That's Jimmy Carter. That's Jimmy Carter. Right?
We played a clip yesterday, Jim. Tom Hartman was interviewing Jimmy Carter back in 2015, something along those lines. And Carter was lamenting the money in politics, and basically calling us an oligarchy. Already, I mean, I guess not that long, maybe 10 years ago. Certainly seems to ring true today, especially when we see the actions of these billionaires either supporting wholeheartedly or bending the knee and kissing the ring and giving millions of dollars to his inauguration. He wasn't very far off, in my opinion. What do you think?
He was not far off at all. And again, even at that time, when you look at the price of a presidential campaigns for Congress, they're almost quaint, right? They're almost cute in terms of the dimension that they're so much lower than they are today. And what he was saying, of course, is that money also dictates policy, right?
Weird how that works.
Who knew? Who knew, right? Well, apparently Jimmy Carter did. I think we know that as well. And many of the things, I think one of the reasons why people look at him and say you're not especially successful is because he did not have a great relationship with the Congress and did not get a lot of things done in the Congress. Many things he did accomplish. But in terms of big ticket items, he was talking about health care at that time. Couldn't get that passed either. Part of the reason was, of course, there was a very strong financial support for those people, even back in 1977 and 78, 79, who had economic interests, and he was fighting against that at that time.
Folks, you're listening to the Dom Salvia Show. That's James Santelle, host of Amicus, a law review, a former U.S. attorney. Joining me for today, you can do so as well, 855-752-4842. President Joe Biden spoke. We have a couple of comments from him at the Jimmy Carter funeral. We'll get to that as well, and of course, other topics as well. A couple of the texters, the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Yes.
Yeah, we got to talk about that as well. What? No mention of the investigation report, Jack Smith being made public? Come on, Steve from Milwaukee. We will certainly get there as well. Be patient. We'll get to all of it with your calls, 855-75-CIVIC. Stick around.
All right. And you're hearing a crackle of some kind.
Yes. All right. I'm flipping your channel off and Dom turning yours on.
Check. 1 2 1 2. Check 1 2.
Yep, it's on Jim's mic. All right, Jim, I'm going to have you use mic 3. Let's see.
Is that better? Is that
No.
No, it is not.
Can you please try the mic to
so
your
we
right?
should do
It won't change anything. Just go over to the other mic.
Look at us. Right. Jess, how's that? Is that?
That's so much better.
Oh my goodness, it's like easy listening.
Oh gosh. Okay.
There was a crackle, huh?
There was a crackle and it was driving me nuts. All right. Problem fixed. Thank you
Okay,
very much. We
okay.
have 50 seconds.
All
Are we
righty.
going to have the Biden sound, or we don't have the Biden?
Just give me a second. I'll cut it live. Ten seconds.
And welcome back to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-484-2855-575. Civic, it's a phone line, it's a text line. Callers get priority, but we do have a few texters here as well. Also at the table, James Santelle, former U.S. attorney, host of Amicus Law Review, going to be hanging out with us all the next 2 hours, and Just PS on the board. Some of the texters out there. Let's see. Another one. Is it true that Trump's bestie Vlad doesn't have access to the Panama Canal? Is that why he wants it? I know they have crossed before. I guess I'm not clear as of this very moment. Jim, you got any opinion on that?
You know, I think a lot of people say, well, we're just bargaining. We're throwing it out there.
Yes,
we all know it's crazy. The question I ask when you think about
Posturing.
posturing, we're thinking about the future so we can get a better posture overall, all economically and internationally. What is it we're bargaining for or with when it comes to Greenland? What is it that we need to either to get from them? What Panama, Canada? What is that thing? My own sense, I think we're way overanalyzing. We're overthinking this. This is just Donald Trump being Donald Trump. We're just proposing and saying things out there that have no connection to reality. And frankly, what is he doing? Listen to what we're all doing now. We're talking about that instead of talking about asking him, when are my grocery prices going to go down?
Well,
Mr.
great point.
Right?
Great point. And it's going to be the energy. He said this, and someone did during his loony press conference. Someone actually did ask the question, what about, bringing these prices down?
Cost of eggs.
It's hard to bring it down, Jim.
Right.
It's really hard. Now, it's going to happen fast, but it's hard to do. And, it's all because of everyone else's fault, but it's also because of energy. And we're going to have great energy, even though we already produce more oil out of this country than we ever have in our history. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of that going on, some shiny objectism from Donald Trump, because of course we have lots of legal issues. Do we have the sound from Joe Biden today at Jimmy Carter's funeral? Give me a thumbs up whenever you're ready for that. And we'll play you that sound.
He talked, Dom, about, many people saying that Jimmy Carter was a part of a bygone era. That's the expression that our current president used, right?
Well, yeah, when you're 100 years old, everybody who's 100 years old is part of a bygone era, Jim.
1924, the man was born, right? And yet he said, this is a man who is forward-looking, just as we were chatting in the first segment here. This is a guy who had his eyes on the future and maybe had some visions for the country that we didn't appreciate back then and still are wrestling with in terms of his place in history. A bygone era, but nonetheless, things that are bygone eras can sometimes be instructive. That great phrase, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Right?
It does,
those kinds of things, again, very much. His grandson talking about the fact, he said, I spoke with my grandfather on a regular basis, and I want to tell you that he was the same guy around the kitchen table there in the ranch house that has a value of $154,000 as he is in public. And he said that's the definition of integrity.
Yeah.
Grandson speaking, right? Stuart Eisenstadt that. Again, I shouldn't say my former boss, because that again blasters me in a place that I was not at, but stood up and said, look at all them. He was a Renaissance man. Look
Was
at
that
all
a paid internship, Jim?
Very, very lowly paid. If I remember, my parents were kind of helping me out with some rent there in Foggy Bottom, but great opportunity to get to be there.
For sure,
right? And Stuart Eisenstadt talking about how multifaceted this man was, a fly fisherman, right? Author, plainly a statesman, someone who was engaged around the world. This is during his presidency. Someone who is wrestling, yes, indeed, with the Iran hostage crisis and making a decision. I remember the circumstances of that failed effort. Desert One, disaster.
Yeah.
And yet he took those tough decisions, made the decision in the end not to go in and bomb Tehran, and in the end, 444 days later, again, as Ronald Reagan was taking the oath of office, they cleared airspace, and indeed, all of them came out alive. There's something to be said for that, right? Even with the great violation of diplomatic rules and regulations there, right?
I mean, minor footnote, Jim. Reagan was, and through his crew and his proxies, were telling the Iranians to not release him. You'll get a better deal from Ronald Reagan. It wasn't the first time that Ronald Reagan, his administration, would be dealing with the Iranians in a, let's call it, unethical manner.
You remember a thing called Iran-Contra, which as a bookend of that administration. Some people also investigated and criminally indicted and charged and
what
convicted.
happened to those folks?
Right? Virtually not. Again, even Ronald Reagan was a subject, again, not a target, a subject of the Department of Justice investigation, speaking about bygone eras and things that happened during the course of our lives. There was a real assessment that he did not recall a lot of things.
I don't remember.
Right?
I'm an old man. I'm confused. I've seen that Seinfeld episode. We got some sound from Joe Biden. Let's play it. Thank you, Jess, for your hard work. Here's the president at the Carter funeral.
I miss him, but I take solace in knowing that he and his beloved Rosalind are reunited again.
I mean, one of Biden's super skills is the empathy and speaking to these terms. Let's keep going, Jess. Let's lay them out.
Throughout his life, he showed us what it means to be a practitioner of good works and a good and faithful servant of God and of the people.
Let's keep going.
May God bless a great American and a dear friend and a good man.
Joe Biden.
Jimmy Carter's friendship taught me, and through his life taught me, the strength of character. I miss him, but I take solace in.
Is that it? We got them all? Okay.
That's it.
All
Sorry.
Right. That's all right. That's right. No, we're getting them on the fly here. Thank you, Jess. Some very kind words from the current president to the former president, talking about him and his being a man of God and being a man of character.
Right.
And I can't help but wonder, there's a president-elect sitting in that front row, Jim. What are people going to say in not so many years from now as they reflect back on what Donald Trump's
memorial service will look like, and what people will say about that, right? You will certainly get people who will be able to stand up and say those kinds of things about him. But again, I'd like to think today that whether you're Republican, Democrat, unaffiliated, somewhere in between, left, right, you look at this and you say, ultimately a decent man both in the presidency and outside of the presidency. Joe Biden also, of course, at the time was also one of the first people to endorse him in 1975, 1976, so it goes way back.
James Santelle, former U.S. attorney, joining me today. You can do so as well. 855-752-4842. I never would wish anybody ill, but I've read a few obituaries with glee. Come back with us.
30.
Listening to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-4842. James Santelle, host of Amicus, a law review on Saturdays here on the Civic Media Radio Network. Joining me at the table, Just PS is on the board, running the show. And you folks are on the lines and on the text. Dana from La Crosse, he chimes in. Trump is attacking Panama because his hotel there is under some $75 million lawsuit for some type of fraud. I don't know if that's exactly accurate, but I do remember the Trump name getting torn off the building.
Sure, right.
Down in Panama, which I thought was rather amusing. We're going to wrap up our conversation. Jimmy Carter funeral going on today. You talked about these former, candidates, Mondale and folks that were had pre-written notes for the eulogy for Carter, but he outlived them all.
He outlived them all, right?
100 years,
right? So both Gerald Ford, obviously the 38th president of the United States, were defeated by Jimmy Carter, and also Walter Mondale, who was Jimmy Carter's vice president, went on to again be a candidate for the presidency himself unsuccessfall. Both of them.
Was that against Reagan, right?
Exactly, right. And both of them anticipating, of course, that at some point Jimmy Carter, as we all will die, that he would die. They authored their memorial remarks long in advance, and it turns out that both Gerald Ford and Walter Mondale preceded Jimmy Carter in death. And so today what you get is their sons reading their memorials, their reminiscences.
That's amazing.
That's just too good. That's just too great in history, right, for that to happen. Quite literally bringing history to life right there. And in the category, maybe one of the other observations that I come away with today and in other days recently, everything old is new again, right, Dom? We talk about that. We talk about these other things, the Department of Education, Panama, those kinds of things. Pardons also. Second or maybe the third day in office, Jimmy Carter pardons all of the so-called Vietnam draft dodgers and brings them back home, basically, and says, you are once again welcome to come back home, and the Department of Justice will not prosecute you. Says we've got to get over that particular period in our nation's history, plainly very controversial, the entire war, and heals the nation by doing that, right? Wonder, again, in the category of comparisons, if the incoming president in, 11 days from now pardons, say, 1,600 people for their involvement in January 6th. Will they make the analogies to that? Will we be talking about that in the same? Probably will, inappropriately, obviously, without congruity there at all.
I mean, right. I mean, there's a pardon, a Carter pardon, and a Trump pardon. I mean, but they're entirely different. I mean, if you're talking about draft dodging, folks that would run out of the country to not want to die in a political war. I mean, that's ultimately what this
and do it out of conscience, right? Yes. They feel that we again, I recognize that to this day this can be a controversial issue, but do not do something to destroy the nation to articulate their views. 1,600 people attacked our country, right?
That's a little different.
And again, we will see what happens on the second or third day, or maybe the first day, maybe the second or third month, if Donald Trump does in fact extend these pardons. Again, the issues are stunningly parallel and stunningly apart when you think about Jimmy Carter, this amazing human being who occupied the chief executive position, And our incoming president, his second term, hopefully, it has to be his last term also in office.
Well, I mean, that's how the rules are
that's
now.
The rules,
but,
right?
Things could change. You never know. I mean, that's kind of one of the concerns about somebody who doesn't appreciate norms and standards and history.
Right. And simply doesn't understand how government works beyond that. And that's also the difference. And maybe I mentioned already a final comment. Jimmy Carter was an incredibly intelligent human being. Goes to Annapolis, graduates 39th out of 600 cadets there, and wants to become a part of the submarine service there. Rickover is around at that time, and he applies there. And Jimmy Carter's 39th. He's not the top of the list. He says, "I really want to do this," and Rickover gives him a chance to do it. And of course, he excels. This guy was incredibly bright, But you're doing nuclear submarines, with due respect to many other good positions in America, you're not doing many other things. You are literally applying the things you've learned and your basic smarts. He was an intelligent guy, in addition to all the other things he brought to the presidency.
And will these things be said in regards to Donald Trump? Would you say these kind things if you would happen to? You would
I would not.
No.
I would not. I do not think that Donald Trump is intelligent. I don't think he cares to learn more about what's going on here, right? Even when we think about, he's talking these days about, I want a big, beautiful bill, right, to do everything in my first, few months or so.
Yeah.
And I wonder out loud if he understands how legislation, schoolhouse rocks, how a bill becomes a law, right? And
the money people come in and stuff the money into the legislators' pockets, and then those legislators will push through that bill. That's how it works, right?
Exactly.
Isn't that how it works?
I wonder, I'm sure you heard the word filibuster. I wonder if he understands that still, when it comes to non-financial things, and yes, there's a reconciliation process, you can get some money stuff done without getting the 60 votes. But for the most part, you still that filibuster in the United States Senate. Mm-hmm. You do not have a 60-vote majority, Mr. President. You've got a razor-thin majority in the House, a very close to razor-thin majority in the Senate. You're going to have a lot of challenges here if you have defections in both houses. You may be surprised. I wonder if he appreciates what you need to do to get legislation accomplished, and even establishing priorities, and even something as simple and as dramatic and as horrific as his proposal to pack up and send hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants,
or millions
across the border. Huge challenges with that. Practically, in terms of procedure, legally doing that, this notion I'm going to do it on day one. Let's talk in 12 days and see if you have accomplished that. I just don't know that he understands how government works.
Well, I don't know if he cares. I mean, I think he's a big fan of the 10 Commandments movie. So let it be written, so let it be done. I mean, that's Donald Trump's kind of mentality. And perhaps reality is catching up to some degree. Initially, I believe it was last week, Trump said, I want this all in one big, beautiful bill. And now he kind of backpedaled a little bit, talked to some folks in the Senate. Well, maybe I'll take it in two, but I'd rather have one. And of course, just practically speaking, if you lump everything into one bill, you're going to have people are going to have to prioritize their thoughts versus having several bills for several different things. You could have some Democratic folks that want to tighten up the border and do some things. Hell, they passed, the toughest bill, a bipartisan bill that Trump quashed. He told his folks, get rid of it. Don't do that. That would be beneficial to Joe Biden, and I'm running for election.
Bipartisan support on that.
So he got rid of that. But once assuming you have some support, some of that support will continue. But if you wrap it into a bill that says, hey, we're going to give these big tax cuts or continue these tax cuts, well, now that Democrat has to decide, do I want to, go down this road and further support and defend the border, quote unquote, and then along with that, also these tax cuts. Well, they might want to do one versus the other, but if you throw them in two, they're going to have to make that decision, and probably will be no.
Right, and you only have one vote. You can't divide your vote into fractions and say, I'm going to throw a little bit here, a little bit there. I don't think he appreciates, again, those kinds of realities. He probably has a sense of how you get this done in terms of picking up the phone and calling people and telling them that, if you don't vote as we want you to vote, I'm going to identify some people to primary you in the next election. I think he understands how that can work. I think he understands how money works, but it's not civics.
And that's going to have diminishing returns as time goes on. I mean, he's already kind of a lame duck. I mean, it's definitely after the 2 years, after the midterms. I mean, it's over. I mean, he's going to have to get everything done prior to then.
And his chief of staff has already said that these are going to be the 2 active years. That's why he's talking about whether it's one big, beautiful bill or a couple that maybe can be split up. He's talking about doing it very quickly. Frankly, all presidents sort of do that. We call Barack Obama focused an awful lot to his success ultimately on what we know today as Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. A lot of people said, well, gee, why don't you focus on other things? He was pretty much hell-bent on getting that done, and he did it fairly early. Tried to compromise, did not get the Republican support he anticipated.
He compromised, but he didn't get the benefit of that compromise.
Nobody voted on the other side.
He was stiffed by the Republicans, and he paid for it, or at least the Democratic Party paid for it in the midterms.
They did, absolutely. And so you make those strategic decisions. I suspect Donald Trump, this time around, as people say routinely, he may not take the advice of the normal, the traditional, the reasonable people who previously surrounded him in the first part of the first term. This time, I think he knows what he can and cannot do. And you look at the appointees.
I was going to say, it's a different class of appointees, man.
This is the L word. This is loyalty, right?
Yeah.
If you look at Pam Bondi in Justice Department, Kash Patel, the FBI, these are all people he looks to for loyalty and anticipates that he will be able to pick up the phone and say, I want this done. It's an efficient way of doing government. It is not a good way of doing government.
James Santelle, former U.S. attorney, joining me at the table today, 855-752-4842. Durbin apparently spoke with Bondi. He posted on the X, just met with Pam Bondi, Donald Trump's attorney general pick. Given her responses to my questions, I remain concerned about her ability to serve as an attorney general who will put her oath to the Constitution ahead of her fealty to Donald Trump. And I would just say, well, Dick, copy and paste, because you could say that about every single nominee that Donald Trump has put forth.
Right. We've got somebody going to the Defense Department who is also making the rounds on Capitol Hill. Those will be interesting hearings as well. We've got Tulsi Gabbard, who's going to be in charge of our international intelligence. Right.
Maybe. Some folks say the senators want the FBI file on her first.
Right.
Well, yeah, of course.
Why wouldn't you? Right.
You would absolutely want that.
Right. And it's not. That's not even a partisan political thing. That's just due diligence.
Right.
You're hiring someone. That's really what James Madison was talking about. When you say advice and consent, all right, you've got somebody who's gotten through the process. The application looks good. Now let's get it to the HR people to make certain that everything is good and we've got everything right in place. That's what the Senate, right?
It was a long time ago. Forget about it.
Right.
Jim, I'm just curious. I did see an article earlier today, and it was I think it was a former Republican, a former conservative, and the philosophy he was basically saying is Dems don't give them anything. Don't come to the Republicans' support. Don't vote on bills if they can't get it. And it's bad, and it could be certainly bad for the country. That's on the Republicans. They have the votes. Leave it to them. Make them pay the price. Make them carry the albatross for their lack of ability to get things done when they have themselves have the numbers. If they were to work in together, they could get these things done. What do you think of that kind of posturing?
I think it depends upon what the issue is. You've got some big
issue,
right?
Every single
debt ceiling,
everything.
Keeping the government open, those kinds of things.
The Republicans can do it.
Let it
the
happen.
Republicans can do it.
Right.
They can do it.
Yeah.
Keep the government open, Republicans.
Right.
What do you think about that?
There is some attractiveness to it, having been inside the government for 30 years. And I remember well those days when literally I'm getting the memorandums from Maine Justice telling me you need to shut down the office and tell people to go home and not get paid and not do the function of your office. Those were scary times.
Yeah, but you got reimbursed, man. Right? You got caught up. I mean, so what? I mean, you got to lean on the credit card a little bit. Welcome to my world, man.
And the Janet Yellens of the world write more letters and say, there are a few things that I can do to keep us afloat for a little while, but ultimately our bond rating is good.
Republicans have a mandate.
Right.
That's what they say. We got a mandate. Everyone wants what we want. Okay. Make it happen.
Right. And there is something to that. The question is, what is the catastrophe that could happen long term or even short term? I got to tell you, the author of that piece, there is some attractiveness to it, right? And it also sends another message, again, to the American population. I realize 49.9% voted for Donald Trump, 49.7% voted for Kamala Harris. But to the extent that there is this sense that they're believing in Donald Trump as the savior, the person person who can do it all for you. He continues to talk in those terms. All right. Let's look at that and see what that looks like. In fact, that is not a valid way, again, of doing government. And I will use the L word here. He lied to you about what he can accomplish and what he cannot accomplish. There might be something in terms of a lesson to America.
Well, and
right?
in wrapping up that point, and the malaise speech we talked about from Carter. That would be somewhat of that kind of reaction. Hey, folks, you wanted this? Here you got it. They got the numbers. You give him a mandate. Let them govern. They don't need the Democrats. And if and when they fail, that remains on the Republicans.
And that's history then. That's history.
855-752-4842. Going to move on to other topics. Donald Trump appealing to the U.S. Supreme Court after a phone call to Alito. What's going on? Join us. Welcome back to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-4842. James Santelle, former U.S. attorney, host of Amicus, a law review, sticking around for the day. Just PS is on the board. You folks on the lines, 855-75-CIVIC. Mark from Sussex, he texted in, lots of positives for Carter, multiple enormous faults. Good man, though. Like, generally, that's the takeaway.
It's probably the case. And Jimmy Carter would say, yes, we all have faults,
well,
right?
Hey,
right?
Speak for yourself, Jim. I'll let you know when I come up with one. Kurt from Madison, Trump has the maturity of an 8th grader at best. He often verbally speaks like that of a 3rd grader. He is an effing moron. Kurt, well, thank you for your contribution. Uncle Tony from Columbus, Jim, can these billionaires be sued for collusion with Trump, given that they are giving favors to him using their businesses, algorithm changes, social media promotions, $40 million for Melania's? Well, she's got a documentary on Amazon. I think she's getting paid.
Right.
That'd be Bezos. That's the Washington Post, who just waxed a cartoon that was critical of Bezos. Can those things be, could those be financial campaign contributions.
Right,
I mean,
yeah,
how would you look at that?
Two big categories always, right? There are criminal things out there, and quid pro quo, right? Those kinds of things. If there is truly corruption, if you're truly buying the vote of someone, you're buying a favor given to you inside a department.
I will give your wife $40 million for her documentary if you give me X, Y, or Z.
I've got this education plan. I've got this commerce plan, this agriculture plan. I need to get that approved. I've got a thing inside the Department of Labor I need to get accomplished, and I'm going to give you this benefit. That's quid pro quo corruption, right? That's the kind of thing that and again, here's the issue, a Department of Justice needs to investigate under Pam Bondi and under, again, the other thing I'll be fascinated to see, the United States attorneys around the country. 92 of them are going to be appointed now. And what kind of approach do they take on those kinds of things? You've got that, and then you've got the other possibility, which your caller also suggests, which is, there's some civil litigation out there too. And while as much as I bemoan this notion that we seem to run into the courts all the time, Donald Trump once again running into court on everything that he just doesn't like. Yeah. The reality is that if there's some economic disadvantage, if you're harmed by something, you do then have standing to say, you know what, because of what the government, my president, my Congress, my agency has done, I am suffering some quantifiable economic loss here. File the lawsuit. The courts are open, right? And those kinds of, you got to be able to establish exactly the damages, and many people probably will, depending upon what happens here.
I've seen some op-eds in the last couple of months saying, well, the courts, justice, will save us. Judiciary. I'm like, oh man, I don't know about that. 855-752-4842. Texters, callers, you get priority callers. Welcome, CJ. What do you got for us?
Hi there, Dom, and as I fondly call him, Mr. Cannoli. Mr. Santelle.
Absolutely. Good to hear your voice, CJ. Good.
Well, thank you for that. Your call for unity, though, Dom, is, I think, really questionable. It speaks louder about the Democrats than it does. I thought these representatives were sent to help the American people, not just block Donald Trump.
Oh, come on. Listen. I don't. You're going to tell me that that's what the Republicans are doing? I mean, listen, are you afraid a little bit of your own medicine? If you have given the Republicans and MAGA and Donald Trump a mandate, I think there is a good argument for the Dems just to sit back on their hands and let you guys hammer it all out. You wanted this? You think you have a mandate? Then knock it out. And when you can't get it done, if you can't get it done, that's on you, man. Why should the Democrats be involved in your mandated internal affairs of the Republican Party, CJ?
Well, I'm not talking about that, but
what are you talking about then?
Bill. I'm talking about working across the aisle on issues that are affecting the American people. And you're just talking like the DAs around the country.
Except that, CJ, as Don was saying before, and reminding us all, there was this omnibus piece of legislation that would, working across the aisle, right? Democrats and Republicans both, could have been the law of the land today. You're
talking about the immigration bill.
Right? Exactly. Doing everything from border security to streamlining the process for all kinds of things. The visas, which are the subject of an awful lot of debate and attention these days. Getting the right number of immigration judges and addressing huge backlogs, staffing, all kinds of things. Not perfect. We were within minutes, hours maybe, of getting that done. And this president said no.
And this president said no. CJ, how do you respond to that?
Thank God.
But it was a bipartisan bill, CJ. You're going against your own philosophy right now. You just told me that for some reason I'm the one. I'm falling flat on my calls for unity. I'm just saying, man, if you want something good for the American people, something bipartisan, working across the aisles, as Jim mentioned, we had that for a border bill, and your guy nixed it. What do you say to that?
I said, thank God, because it was a bad bill. And there was H.R. 2 on the Senate desk, and Chuck Schumer blocked it for 9 months.
Well, there's all those kinds of things in the Senate. There's all sorts of games being played all the time. But forgive me if I think your criticism of my lack of unity falls flat. Your criticism falls flat, sir, because you are fine with Trump killing a bipartisan bill for political reasons that would have been good for this country. Folks, stick around. Come back with us. We have a guest at the top of the 5 o'clock hour, Jack Kelly. He's the State House reporter with Wisconsin Watch. We have a Wisconsin Supreme Court race coming up in April. You thought it was over, folks? Hell no. Governance, it continues. Stick around.
Hello, Jack. Can you hear me?
Hey, yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
How we doing?
All right, we're doing well. I'm just gonna... Who took away my... Someone took away my layout again.
Boom, 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 boom.
All right. I'm gonna mess with something, and then we'll get you on the screen.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Aaron.
Oh, the 3 guest layout
Yeah.
isn't there. That's weird.
What the heck? It's like here, but wrong.
That is bizarre.
Well, this is why we have this break. Give me a second.
Are your incoming levels of Jack all good?
Look at that. There we go. Beautiful. All right. Jack, you're all set.
Perfect.
Aaron, thank you for your help.
Yep. Do you need anything else?
I think we are good. So we're going
Right.
to cover that back up. Jack, did you want to talk with Dom at all before we get rolling?
I mean, I'm at his mercy. Whatever he needs.
All right. Well, we will get started in 4.5 minutes.
Okay, sounds great. The little more tactile when Todd's sitting here next to me during these commercial breaks, huh?
Yeah, that's the weird thing about the remote shows, but it is what it is, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, hey, this is everything about this setup is better than the setup that I was gonna hobble together at my apartment. So
Yeah, still probably better than sitting at home.
yeah. Todd's 12 to 2 every day? Yeah.
Oh, and I don't know if they said or if you already know, at 5:06 is when it starts.
Okay, cool. Yeah, she said 4.5 minutes, so.
10.
Broadcasting across the state of Wisconsin on the Civic Media Radio Network and around the world on the Civic Media app. This is the Dom Salvia Show. And now, here's your host, Dom Salvia.
And welcome to the Dom Salvia Show. Thank you so much for listening. You can be a part, 855-752-4842. Just PS on the board across the desk. James Santelle, former U.S. attorney and host of Amicus, a law review. You can check him out on Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. And jazzed as hell to introduce to you Jack Kelly. He's a State House reporter with WisconsinWatch.org. And he has a recent piece out talking about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election. Jack, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dom. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. Thanks for coming around, man. You know, we just got done with an election, barely into the new year, and here we go again. In my understanding, Jack, this is going to be a very expensive election.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to be shaping up that way. Both Brad Schimmel, the conservative candidate, and Susan Crawford, the liberal candidate, just this week did some self-reporting of their fundraising numbers, and they broke the record for this period in time. Schimmel did, reporting first, and then Crawford came along and broke it again, and that's just the candidates. So never mind the fact once we get into the state parties and outside groups, and a lot of people are going to be watching this race. It's kind of the first race across the entire country since November that will have a lot of eyeballs. So it'll certainly be expensive.
Very expensive, a lot of dark money, and wow, records for this reporting term for both candidates. That's amazing. That's amazing, Jack. The production, let's call it, out of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Only 14 cases decided. Kind of slow. What's your take on that, Jack?
I think it is interesting and it is unique. If you compare the court's most recent term, the kind of 23-24 term, if you will, to prior terms. Yeah, only 14 cases, though they were certainly some high-profile cases. So I think if you were to ask folks familiar or the justices themselves, they might say, yeah, okay, maybe on paper it looks like we didn't do that much, but actually we took on some of these massive cases that can be quite time-consuming and involve a lot of fact-finding. To some degree, which the Supreme Court, as Jim could tell you, is not equipped to do necessarily in the way that a trial court is. Yeah. And so it can certainly contribute to that. But yeah, no, it's certainly an outlier. I mean, typically the state Supreme Court takes and disposes of, that's the technical term, settles 50, 60 cases in a term.
Wow.
That's been kind of the 20th century average. Of course, things change. For a long time, Wisconsin did not have a court of appeals. If you lost in circuit court, your only recourse was to appeal to the state Supreme Court. So, of course, they were hearing a lot more cases in those years back in the day. But, 14 was certainly a low output by any measure when you compare it to prior years.
And I think this statistic kind of goes along with the former conservative Wisconsin Supreme Courts. Of those 14 cases, only 4 of them were settled along 4-3 ideological lines. And in my understanding, based on the history of the previous conservative courts, that's not uncommon. Most cases are solved, if not unanimously, certainly with large majorities. Is the court as biased? Biased, maybe that's the wrong term. As political or ideologically split as some people think? I mean, one would think that perhaps all 14 of those cases would have been across ideological lines.
That is a really interesting question. I'm certain that depending on who you ask, you would get a different answers.
Yeah, right.
I will say that when you look at the 4-3 cases, they were ones that you might expect to be settled along 4-3 along ideological lines. 4 liberal justices in the majority, the 3 current conservative justices in the minority. It was the redistricting case, of course, which Democrats were eager to bring once Justice Janet Protasiewicz was sworn in. Obviously, there had been a really long, drawn-out saga of redistricting litigation after the 2020 census. It was, honestly, it is a little bit unusual for it to come up again so soon. Also, the case about the use of unstaffed absentee ballot drop boxes. The then conservative-controlled court just a couple of years ago outlawed them in Wisconsin. 3 of those 4 justices that voted in that are still on the court. Now, of course, they believe that their decision should still be in place, but they were, in the minority at that point. So the other 2, were maybe a little less surprising. One of them involved Catholic Charities Bureau and whether or not they qualify for an exemption from having to pay into the state's unemployment program. And the fourth one, it was an eminent domain case, whether or not the village of Egg Harbor up in Door County could take a piece of land from a restaurant so that they could build a sidewalk. So maybe not that controversial. And there were political cases that they settled, 6-1. I look at the Evers versus Markline case, which was all about the so-called legislative veto and whether or not the Joint Finance Committee and the legislature could block certain conservation projects. They got together, 6-1, agreed with the governor on that one, with Rebecca Bradley, who is maybe the most outspoken conservative member of the court, siding with her liberal colleagues in that one. So
Jack,
it's not always so straightforward.
All right, Jack, you make a great point, too. We forget that whether it's the United States Supreme Court, the Supreme Courts of all the states, the majority of the cases that they address are not taking headlines of the sort that you report on routinely, right? And maybe there's a reason for that. An awful lot of procedural things happen, right?
Yeah,
and a lot of things need to be resolved that important to lawyers, very important for the litigants themselves, but they just don't attract that attention. And for that reason, again, and they do not partake of partisan views when it comes to resolving them. Understanding how the federal rules of civil procedure work or other state criminal code should be applied. Those things may not always fall down along partisan lines, and that's the reason why you get the majority of them.
And those are boring headlines.
That's the point. Right?
Yeah,
That's
typically,
James
they're not
Santelle.
interested in those cases typically.
Right.
That's James Santelle, former U.S. attorney. We're joining Jack Kelly. He's a State House reporter with WisconsinWatch.org. One of my go-to places to check out local news here, folks. I suggest you do so as well, WisconsinWatch.org. Okay, Jack, let's do the what ifs, right? So we have two candidates. One's a conservative, one's a liberal. Let's go down that road. If Susan Crawford, the quote-unquote liberal candidate, wins, what happens then?
Well, let's be clear, Dom. There's no way to know for certain, but there are certainly clues of how these things could happen. Susan Crawford, Dane County judge, prominent in the Madison legal community for several years. I mean, was an attorney that was involved in a legal challenge to Act 10 back when Act 10 was first coming around, has represented Planned Parenthood in litigation. Prominent figure. She's endorsed by the 4 current liberal justices. And, there is no primary now that the filing deadline has come and gone. And so it was pretty clear that in the kind of liberal legal world, the justices were setting the agenda of who they wanted the candidate to be.
Yeah.
So I think, you could extrapolate and just, and not necessarily the most recent term is not a great example of this, but the liberal justices do disagree with each other on certain cases. So there's no certain way to say for sure she's just going to fall in line and lockstep and do everything with them. But it seems likely that you will get a court more akin to the one that we have today if Susan Crawford is elected.
And that would give the liberal courts the majority up until at least 2028?
Yeah, that's right. Because the way that it works here in Wisconsin, justices are elected to 10-year terms. They happen in April. And you were joking about it being election season again. Dom, it's going to be election season for eternity in Wisconsin because we have a state Supreme Court race, of course, coming up in a few months in April. But then we have a state Supreme Court race in April of 2026, of 2027, of 2028, of 2029, and of 2030. So there won't be a reprieve from these kind of high-profile elections. But the way that they fall, if Susan Crawford wins, the next 2 justices that are up for re-election are Rebecca Bradley and Chief Justice Annette Ziegler, who are both conservative members of the court.
And those are coming up in the next subsequent following 2 years?
That's right, 2026 and
2027. So if Susan Crawford were to lose this election, for those on the left that are hoping that she wins, we'll get another crack at it coming up in the next year.
Yeah, there were 2 opportunities to have a go at it. The interesting thing maybe, and this is the other side of your question, is the what if Brent Schimmel wins, what happens? We actually have an idea of this. We would go back to a court of kind of the 2020 to 2023 era where Justice Brian Hagedorn, who's kind of the quieter, less kind of more unassuming member of the court, doesn't quite get into it with his colleagues in the way that some of the other justices do, would have a lot of influence during that 3-year period. He was the decision maker. There were 61 cases, I believe, settled 4-3 along 4-3. He was in the majority the 4-justice majority in 50 of those 61 cases. He is the person that really is the deciding vote when it comes to things. So, we have an idea of where both things are going to be, kind of keep the liberal court as is, and also, kind of re-empower Brian Hagedorn to have a lot of influence up at the Capitol building.
Jack Kelly, State House reporter at WisconsinWatch.org, has a piece out today, I guess yesterday. You also mentioned political discord empowers the court. What do you mean by that, Jack?
Well, this is not my idea, and it's maybe not a new idea, and I'm sure Jim will be able to point to many examples of this. But the idea that right now, the more traditionally political branches of government in Wisconsin, the legislature and the governor, don't see eye to eye very often. Of course, they do reach compromise and they work things out, but oftentimes they don't. Oftentimes they're suing each other, and oftentimes they're landing in court because when those two branches can't work together, somebody has to answer the question. Typically, it becomes the court. And so, I was talking to a law professor at Marquette, a guy named Chad Oldfather, super knowledgeable, and he described it in the piece. I believe I mentioned it. He said something along the lines of, in America, all questions tend to become legal questions, and in the current political environment that we are in, it seems to be happening more often.
Everything eventually goes to the law.
We look more and more to the judges. Frankly, Jack, I suspect your piece kind of supports this notion to decide policy, right? When you think about all the things that are in the courts these days, whether it's the circuit courts, the appellate courts here in Wisconsin, from the Supreme Court, federally, look at all of even something as simple as TikTok, right? Tomorrow, we're going to be hearing about that in the Supreme Court. Social media issues, healthcare issues, education. You mentioned, again, of course, the voting issues, Jack, all these kinds of things. We used to think that that's a legislative thing, right? And maybe the governor says yes or no, and we've got a fight between them. We are way beyond the time when the Supreme Court Chief Justice said, I just call balls and strikes. That's not the case anymore, right? We're addressing these big ticket policy issues on a regular basis.
Yeah, and certainly it is happening. I mean, it's going to happen twice. Next week, we have two cases becoming before the state Supreme Court, and they're very technical. To your point, it's about whether or not an agency needs to promulgate rules before it can enforce something or the other thing. But the reality is that it'll be boiled down to, can the executive branch do policymaking? And in the other case, it's, can the state DNR enforce the spill law if somebody, if there's PFAS contamination on a business's property, et cetera. So there's real world consequences for these very technical questions.
Yes, they are. Jack Kelly, State House reporter, WisconsinWatch.org. Jack, thank you so much for coming around. Please do so again as news continues to break. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Folks, this is the Dom Salvia Show. Come back 855-752-4842. Thank you for listening to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-4842. Want to thank our most recent guest, Jack Kelly, State House reporter with WisconsinWatch.org. His piece that was published on Monday, my bad, Jack, that was on Monday, January 6th. Another pivotal Wisconsin Supreme Court election offers two familiar outcomes. Folks, I know it's always tough these days to get some decent reporting. Jack and the team over at Wisconsin Watch do a fine job. Check them out, WisconsinWatch.org. All right. Speaking of Supreme Courts, let's go down this road. The president-elect, James Santelle, at the table with me, has asked the U.S. Supreme Court.
He does know that there's a Supreme Court, so I'll give him that, right?
Yes,
right?
yes.
And he's had some success with them before, right?
Well, come on, man. They give him a get-out-of-jail-free pass.
And it turns out that the guy who argued on behalf of immunities for him, turns out he's going to be the Solicitor General in a couple of weeks here. So it all works out well.
It's all in the family. It's all in the family. So what is his ask of the U.S. Supreme Court?
Right. He's asking, again, we're still looking at our watches here because TikTok, we know that Juan Merchan is scheduled to call the case of New York versus Trump tomorrow morning and finally sentence. That's what we do in America.
Do you believe it's going to happen?
Exactly.
Come on, man.
And, I will
give
see
me
it
some odds.
Right.
Give me some odds.
We still have, by my count, we still about 15 hours to go. Anything can happen.
So yes or no, or do you want a line?
My thought is yes. I think it will happen. Yes. And however, again, we've got 15 hours. So what happens is the New York Appeals Court, all the courts there say, no, we're not stepping in. We're not stopping this. He runs to the United States Supreme Court and says, stop this from happening. Not good. And interestingly, among other things, talk about non-legal reasons, but a political reason, he said, if this goes ahead, somehow it will interrupt the course of my preparation for becoming my transition into the presidency. That's his principal argument. And again,
we have the other one. So he has the public release of the special counsel report, which is a separate issue.
Exactly.
Now his concern there, and the sub headline over at the Washington Post: the president-elect's lawyers say the public release, again, the different topic here, the special counsel report would violate his right to an orderly transition to the presidency. Right. I mean, what was January 6th? Now you're all concerned about an orderly transition?
Right. Well, now it affects him, Dom.
Oh, that's right. Oh, that's right.
And this transition up to now has been completely orderly, has it not? Right?
It has been.
Right,
yes.
right. We saw lots of issues there. I think none of them is going anywhere. But along the way, we get this reporting that while the Supreme Court is looking at all these kinds of issues related to the presidency, that a fellow named Sam Alito, who's an associate justice, apparently has a phone call. And it apparently comes from a fellow named William Levi, who is one of the justice's former law clerks, asking that the justice take a call from the president-elect regarding his qualifications to serve in a government position. And the Alito says, I agreed to discuss this matter with President-elect Trump, and he called me yesterday afternoon while literally on the eve of all of this happening. While this is going on, that's the problem. That's the huge problem. And it's easy to say it looks bad, but it's just more than that, right? While you're deciding things that go to the very future of the nation and the status of the president-elect, I think the candidacy of this particular law clerk, maybe he is brilliant and maybe he's going to get this job. That maybe could have waited, maybe even a couple of weeks or so. You need to do that right now.
Yes,
now. And it's the timing that looks so very bad.
But these things don't these little things matter? Like, we talked about Jimmy Carter putting the sun.
The solar panels.
The solar panels. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm losing my mind here. Jimmy Carter putting these solar panels. I mean, it's not going to bring a whole lot of electricity in the White House, but it was a symbolic thing. I mean, it can be interpreted in many different ways. As do these actions by Trump right now.
Right. I will tell you. So this is a thing that happens all the time in the courthouse, and I'm always very, very sensitive to it. You're appearing in front of judges. I work in the state courts principally now. We're in the federal court, and you know them in other settings as well. You see them in the hallways. You see them, and you go out of your. Frankly, when I have a trial coming up the following Monday, I go to the other side of the aisle. I just don't want to have any contact with that judge. Maybe for 4 weeks later, a month later, okay, fine. I can have a little chit chat about what you did over the holidays, those kinds of things. You just don't do it while you're going in to argue a case in front of that very jurist.
What a nice thought, Jim. I mean, what a process of a bygone era.
Right,
Is everything now bygone era? Because it doesn't. I mean, when you have the president-elect calling a U.S. Supreme Court, ostensibly about this Levi character and perhaps other issues as well, when he has, basically cases before them.
Right.
That seems. I mean, I don't call me crazy. It seems a little problematic.
I think it's hugely problematic. And again, the issue is, what are we going to do about it? Well, by the way, the Chief Justice never really articulated. I put forth some standards that we shouldn't have this appearance of impropriety, those kinds of things, and should provide confidence to the American public. There's no enforceability on any of this. And it differentiates the Supreme Court from the lower courts on all this. The problem, once again, is as America looks at this, you think, gee, what else did they perhaps talk about? And frankly, I'll even give them this. Let us assume, I know you're going to bulk this down, let's assume that both of them are being honest about what was said and was not said. The very fact that you're getting a phone call from the president, and oh, by the way, you've got a file on your desk at the far end that has that person's name on it. Actually, 2 files, right? And I've got to decide both of these. And here's the person who's calling me right now.
And several in your cabinet that were already been processed.
Exactly, right. That's the problem. Is it just, and in a situation like this, when you become a Supreme Court justice, when you take a call from the president, I think it's got to be vetted beyond belief. What is the purpose of the call? Let the staff person know you about and ask about it. Frankly, we were routinely told as United States attorneys that if you ever get a call from the White House, the answer is you do not take that call. You call me in justice and say, guess what? Somebody from the White House is calling me in Eastern Wisconsin. You do not want that look. You do not want that engagement. That's how strict the rules should be. We ran roughshod over that completely, admittedly in a different setting here, but same kind of principles apparently do not apply.
That's a nice Supreme Court. Be a shame if anything happened to it. Folks are listening to the Dom Salvia Show. James Santelle, former U.S. attorney and host of Amicus, a law review. That fine show airs on Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. Come back with us. We're going to talk about Fani Willis. We're going to talk about this release of Jack Smith's 1, maybe 2 reports, plus your calls and text 855-752-4842.
1 minute. $15.
Welcome back to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-4842. James Santelle, former U.S. Attorney, host of Amicus, a law review, at the table for the next 30 minutes. Just PS is on the board. I see you folks on the lines and text it in. Be patient. We will get to you, 855-75-CIVIC. All right, let's recap. I know we kind of bounced around there briefly. So New York's highest court on Thursday declined to block Trump's sentencing in the hush money case. Okay, so that means his only recourse, as we discussed, would be going to the U.S. Supreme Court, where he just, had a conversation with Alito about some other totally separate issues, and that's totally fine.
And in fairness to the chronology here, they knew they were going to do this. The call apparently takes place a little bit before the filing the request is made. For that, just to be pure, I know we're focused always on accuracy.
Is that better or worse?
I think you'd make arguments in both directions.
This is what I'm saying.
Right?
Hey,
exactly. Right.
Now it just got you on the mind. And, by the way,
why this is coming, right?
Yeah.
And it shouldn't make a difference. But just for purists who want to identify the timing of these things, that's the timing.
I think think about the old mafia gangster kind of stuff. Hey, I'm gonna have. We just had a nice conversation before my friend's gonna call you. You know what I mean? So I think either way it looks bad. But
absolutely.
So that's the one case, and the U.S. Supreme Court will now, if I recall, was this the one where Sotomayor told the DA, I'm sorry, Alvin Bragg. They had till like yesterday at 10 o'clock to respond. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
They've got some filings that should be made. Frankly, they should be filed right now. And so if we could get onto the docket immediately, we'd see what that looks like. But there may be some action here. Boy, if the United States Supreme Court steps in and stops this, again, my faith begins to dissipate very quickly.
Come on, Justice is Blind is a product of a bygone era, Jim. Okay, so then now this brings us to the next case, of course, and this is the special counsel report. And my understanding, this is going to be kind of broken down into two reports, one
based
for
upon the two cases,
documents and one for the J6.
Right.
Now, Eileen Cannon has stepped in, and I don't know where she get the moxie to step in. What has she got to do with any of this, Jim?
We just spoke on this very broadcast, my friend, about the fact that when she dismissed that case, finding that Jack Smith had no jurisdiction, improperly appointed. Remember this? This is that constitutional problem. She's wrong about that. She bucks up against tens of years.
Now that's under appeal.
So that goes up on appeal, right? And so at the time that she does that, however, she does the extraordinary thing on the last page. She says that I'm dismissing the case. The clerk of court is directed to take everything off the docket. No more hearings, no more filings. This is closed. Well, except that she decided apparently to dip her toe back into the lake of this when she gets an application from the two other defendants. So, again, it's a little bit complicated. Along the way, Jack Smith dismisses the case while it's pending before the 11th Circuit.
The documents case,
but only as to Donald Trump, right?
Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira, who work for Donald Trump, they're still charged
with obstruction of justice. These are the guys who are going around wondering, how can we stop these tapes from recording? How do we destroy all this?
How do we move the boxes?
Right, right. And who's coming when? So there's still the bungling defendants who are out there. And that's the portion of this that's still before the 11th Circuit, right? And so the 11th Circuit still has jurisdiction over this, and presumably at some point will determine whether or not Eileen Cannon was right, even on the underlying case there. Along the way, again, what is going on here, Eileen Cannon? Not only did you wash your hands of this, but it's all before the 11th Circuit now, right? And we've got this fundamental notion in America, we do one case at a time. Going back to the hush money case, it's the reason why I think you and I are pleased by the fact that this case finally, if it's sentenced tomorrow, it will be done. And then if Donald Trump wants to appeal that to the appeals court in New York, he can do that. The same thing applies to the federal courts. She was done with this case. She has no more jurisdiction, not only because she said, I'm through with it, tied it up, and not only put it on the shelf, but deep sixed it somewhere inside the catacombs of the Fort Pierce federal court there. But the 11th Circuit that's the only tribunal right now that should be resolving any of this.
And the 11th Circuit has slapped her down twice before.
Right? Exactly. So they're used to rolling their eyes when they see these kinds of things. And Jack Smith now has appealed even that decision, right, to prevent that. She says, do not release the report. And she actually says, don't release any of this report, right? She says both as to the documents and as to J6.
J6.
Wow.
What if she's zero to do with J6? Okay.
Exactly.
A couple of thoughts that I had with regards to the documents, and this is the hoarding of the national secrets.
Right.
You know, and even when we say, which I think when we say documents, it kind of makes it light. I mean, the guy was hanging on to our crown jewels of national security and secrets,
and talking with people about them.
And we know that. What we don't know is even perhaps scarier. But that aside, we don't know. But so that's that particular case. And the other one, the quote-unquote hush money, well, this is election interference. You paid that money to keep the mouth shut so it wouldn't harm him before an election. You know, Donald Trump has a tendency to, do those kinds of things. So that being said, with regards to the national secret / documents case, these other two defendants, I mean, I kind of get it. I mean, I do feel for them. How could you have this report come out? You haven't even been to trial yet, and your names are all over this thing. I mean, wouldn't that, I don't know, taint the jury pool or something along those lines? Could they? I mean, if we wanted to, I appreciate their position. I don't think their name should be slung through the mud yet. That's what the trial is for. I mean, Donald Trump is not these cats. Just redact their names and anything to do with them.
Right. And
what's the problem?
All kinds of solutions there. And again, that argument is not frivolous at all. Again, the whole reason why, again, the Mueller report came out as it did, because you want to be able to give the targets, the subjects of your report, the opportunity to have them to be their cases tried in a trial setting.
Have their day in court.
Absolutely. So there is that. And that's why, once again, all of this so very convoluted by virtue of the fact also that as a part of his commission, that he's going to go out of business here. He's no longer going to be the special counsel. He is required, not only by virtue of his appointment, but also by the statute under which he was appointed, to produce a report about all of this.
Oh, that's all unconstitutional. Eileen Cannon said it was.
Exactly. And so all these things, the bottom line is, yes, the 11th Circuit needs to wrestle with all of this and get some clarity to all of it. The upshot is that even beyond all the niceties of this, if the Attorney General wants to issue a report, say, for example, on the police in St. Louis, on environmental issues in Portland, on commerce issues and other things out there, this notion that somehow, falling back on our discussion a few moments ago with Jack Kelly, this notion that we went to the courts now, we're stopping everything from happening, and we're preventing now one branch of government from reporting on something that has a public interest to it, right? And when it gets back to the larger issue, which is about J6 and about the assault on our Capitol, please tell me that sometime in the next 9 to 10 days, that report will be issued so that we can get clarity on the trial that would have been, right?
Yeah.
And you've talked about this before. That's the important thing. It's supposed to happen statutorily, supposed to happen by virtue of his commission, and that needs to happen. Even if somehow the documents matter is stymied by the continuing prosecution of the two, this report needs to be issued. The concern is when Merrick Garland and folks are no longer there at 9th and Constitution, what happens with that report? We've seen what Bill Barr was doing with reports in the past. It needs to come out in some fashion sometime in the next week and a couple of days.
Is there any legal barrier for Merrick Garland to release the report on J6? I mean, could he just release that right now? I mean, I don't see how Eileen Cannon's got anything to do with it. I mean, and if he did, would there be any consequence for him to do so?
I would say now in this world, because she has got no jurisdiction over that whatsoever. That's completely absurd. Yes, Merrick, again, going back to our conversation about being a little bit bolder here, now this is a time when release your report. And if
release the Kraken.
Right, exactly, right? If at some point, again, this is a ridiculous order. The 11th Circuit has not yet told him he can't do that. If at some point the 11th Circuit in the next few hours or next few days says you can't do it, you still think, gee, history, right? And what is the remedy for that? I'm not advocating that you violate an order of the court, but there are members of the cabinet who've been held in contempt for doing things that are contrary to what courts will tell them to do. That's the remedy. That's what happened. Eric Holder was held in contempt for sparring with Congress about various things. That's the remedy.
Is there a court order right now preventing Merrick Garland from releasing the J6 report from Jack Smith?
Other than Eileen Cannon's intervention, that's why he's now appealed this.
Okay, so he has appealed it. So he has an order that he thinks is
crazy,
is out of bounds.
Right, and presumably here's what I think will be the good news here. Presumably the 11th Circuit will, third, maybe fourth time, look at Eileen Cannon and say, no, you don't have jurisdiction here. You can go ahead and at least release the January 6th portion of this. Nothing about that relates to the documents case. We've got the other two. Maybe they cut the baby in half here a little bit and do some remedy there. But no reason why this should not come out in the public domain in the next 9 or 10 days. Heavy sigh.
Is time of the essence, in my opinion. If Donald Trump will take office soon, does the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, is this a priority? What's their timing on this?
Well, they certainly live in the real world, right? And they recognize, as all these judges do, that we're going to get a new president here, and there will be not new folks at the Department of Justice, but whoever the acting attorney general is for a while.
New priorities,
right? Exactly,
Jim.
Right? Interesting to see whether Lisa Monaco, who's the deputy attorney general, she will probably leave also, as will Jack Smith and other top leaders there. Maybe the assistant attorneys general. You basically get some caretakers in those positions, and they are then a part of the Trump administration. And the question then is raised when you get that phone call from the White House, from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. What do you do when you've got that directive? Well, it depends upon who's taking the call at the other end. Oh, my goodness. So lots of things and that's the other reason why. In the interest of history, in the interest of bringing this to conclusion, just like tomorrow, Juan Merchan should bring that case to conclusion, let the appeals go forward in New York. Merrick Garland should go ahead and release this report, release it in its entirety.
For the 11th Circuit for a third time slaps down Eileen Cannon, right? That nullifies her order. Now, certainly Donald Trump could appeal that, but to the U.S. Supreme Court. But in the meantime, the order is squashed. Right?
Exactly, right? And again, Donald Trump's attorneys, they know how to file things, could move for a stay of the 11th Circuit decision. In other words, don't go ahead and release this report yet. And the 11th Circuit has a decision then to make about whether or not it stays. If suppose they say, no, we're not going to hold off on doing that, then he runs to the Supreme Court and says, you stay the order of the 11th Circuit. You tell the 11th Circuit.
But in between that time, they could drop it.
They could drop it, exactly right. And that's why, as I've said, timing is so very close here, and this needs to happen. In the end, as I step back from all this, thinking about all these machinations, which are confusing, there is so much going on here. It's a lot. It is a lot. In the end, what he is saying is courts, the federal courts, the state courts, there are things that are going to be said about me that are bad. Stop that from happening. And you know what? When you're the president of the United States of America, that sort of comes with the territory, especially if you've committed crimes and crimes that are not going to see the light of day in trial. You've got to anticipate that there are going to reports that are going to be issued. This is Donald Trump's attempt to reach into the courts and say, they're going to say nasty things about me, and I want you to stop it so the American public does not know about all of the dirty laundry. We know much of it, but there are other things that would come out.
There's a lot we do not know, especially with regards to his efforts or lack thereof or communications on conspiracy and conversations.
With Ginny Thomas and other people on that day, right?
Right.
And that's the reason that I find all this so very troubling. You know, if Donald Trump had more integrity of the sort that we heard about today in connection with Jimmy Carter, he would simply let this happen, let the report be released, and then you get inaugurated and move on, right? You know, and we'll talk about it for a few days, and then he goes on with his presidency, and we'll talk more about Panama and Greenland and Canada. Right?
No more Panama. Van Halen, 855-752-4842. One last segment with James Santelle, Just PS on the board, 855-75-Civic. Come back with us. Welcome back to the Dom Salvia Show, 855-752-4842. Our last segment together today, James Santelle. Everything he does is magic. Check his show out on Saturdays, 9 to 11 a.m. The Amicus, a law review, Just PS is on the board. You folks are on the lines and the texters as well. Tom from West Dallas, he texted. And personally, I believe they should release the investigation the afternoon before the inauguration. That will be huge in the news cycle and take away from Trump's glory day. I love it, Tom. I mean, I'll take it anytime we can get it. But, yeah, certainly before the inauguration.
January 19th. Again, that's what Tom's talking about. Also the day in which we're going to find out whether or not TikTok becomes a part of our national experience here, or maybe somebody's going to buy it between now and then. Or maybe the Supreme Court tomorrow morning is going to tell us more about TikTok.
Am I too old that I don't care what happens with TikTok? I mean, you know what I mean? What? So many other things to play with and hit the buttons and be social about. I'm hard. It's hard for me, and I know there's probably some really serious ramifications that are practically that should be discussed. I'm just like TikTok. Who cares? I know it's a big thing. People make money on this thing. We're talking about people's livelihood.
Right. That's some of the argument to the Supreme Court tomorrow morning about the businesses that are dependent upon TikTok. And if you get rid of this thing, we're going to be upsetting the financial integrity of all these institutions. Tune in tomorrow morning. Split screen, Dom, tomorrow as the incoming president is sentenced in New York and the United States Supreme Court decides whether or not TikTok should go ahead. And that's also the brief in which the incoming president filed his amicus brief in the TikTok case. That was
in the TikTok case,
right?
Where
he said, Supreme Court, hold off, don't do anything, postpone all this. Why? Because when I become president, I can control all this. I'm going to make a decision on this, and basically says I'm the guy who can resolve this, and therefore take this off your docket. That was the amicus brief that Donald Trump filed as the president of the United States of America.
But he's not the president of the United States. We have one president at a time.
Right? In addition to doing all those international things, which apparently is out there doing, God knows what he's doing, he's also filing briefs in the highest court in the land, misrepresenting who he is.
I mean, if that's the least of his crimes, man. 855-752-4842. Susan from McFarland, you are up. Welcome, Susan. Happy days. What do you got for us?
Oh, hi. Thanks, guys. I enjoy listening to your show. And, Jim, I listen to yours every Saturday.
Thank you so much, Susan.
A question I had, one of the questions that's been rumbling around my brain is how can people preserve what has already been discovered and all this stuff that's been going on around whoever's going to be in office next, because I refuse to say his name. And I just really feel as though they would go in with big shredders or take things off servers. So is there a way that this can be preserved so that it's not lost for the history?
Right, I've got some friends who've asked the same thing of me, and I will tell you, Susan, that we live in a world, and I appreciate this now because, again, you can still get access, candidly, to all of my emails when I was the United States Attorney. All those kinds of things are cached forever. And so
no kidding.
Absolutely. Not for all assistant U.S. attorneys, but United States attorneys, all those things are still in the annals, the records of the U.S. Department of Justice. Susan, again, public disclosure is one thing, but the very existence of it, we live in a time when shredders will not take care of it. And we will still have the technological capacity. Jack Smith's report will still exist. It will still exist on servers somewhere inside the department.
Yeah, but it doesn't do us any good if we don't get to see it.
That's absolutely right.
Man, I mean,
that's absolutely right.
If I don't get it, it may as well not exist. If it's not accessible, it's somewhere, but you don't get to see it, it may well not exist.
I agree with you, and that's why it should be disclosed promptly.
I mean, where's the Epstein tapes and books and I mean, remember all that stuff?
Right.
A lot of folks involved. The guy apparently hung himself.
Right.
Well, I mean, what happened to all that information?
Right, and freedom of information requests, those have got to be pursued, right, not only by journalists and others out there. The reality is that, again, not only for history, but now, even with an incoming administration, the notion of coming in there and just sort of torching and burning everything, I think that's 1940s talk. We just don't do that anymore, and it will still be there. The question is, under what terms is it disclosed? Can you get it? Can you lodge it free, even under an incoming administration?
If I got $1 million in the bank and I can't get to it, I do not have any money, dude. 855-752-4842. Mark from the SAC, you are up. You will have the last word today, sir. Thank you. What do you got?
Yeah, thanks. I'd like the guys who talk about the immigration bill to articulate just what was so bad about it. And it occurs to me for the whole documents thing, the whole problem with that is that people that Trump has given that information out to, or adversaries that has given that information out to, can hold that over Trump's head to blackmail him and says, Trump gave us this secret information.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. He's always got to be afraid about that Putin might actually turn on his sorry ass and say, well, Donald Trump betrayed all you people back there, so better watch out, because that's something, the leverage that Trump has. That's what when you deal with criminals, you deal with criminals, and there's no honor among thieves.
All these tendrils, which again, to the extent that people talk about that, I think, Mark, you're exactly right, talk about it as the documents case. Well, he took some things he shouldn't have had. No, the answer is it's got many, many consequences far beyond just, including something as simple, Mark, as you're saying, our national security.
He didn't take like sticky notes, man. He didn't steal some staplers from the office. The guy took national security secrets, lied about having them for over a year. James Santelle, former U.S. attorney, friend of ours, contributor here at the Civic Media Radio Network, and a host of Amicus, a law review broadcasting live on Saturdays 9 to 11 a.m. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. is supposed to be the sentencing time. You say it's going to happen?
I think it's going to happen, yes.
All right,
yes.
I'm taking the other side.
Right, you call me if it doesn't, right?
Thank you, Jim. We'll be tuning into your show on Saturday. Thank you, Jess PS on the board. Thank you for all you folks listening and hanging out with us. Now stick around. Pete Schwab, Nightlight is coming up next. Have a great night.